Imagine the night sky over Africa, thousands of years ago, when electric light did not yet exist, and the stars burned brighter than jewels on the black velvet of the sky. In this deep silence of the African night, under the cover of the starry vault, an old sage of the Dogon tribe sits and leisurely tells his young apprentice about the mysteries of a distant star, a star that the human eye cannot see, but which, according to the ancestors, has been dancing its slow dance in the cosmic void for many thousands of years. I welcome you, my dear listeners, to this cozy corner of the late-night internet, and invite you to write in the comments what city you're from and what time it is where you're listening to this story. Tonight, we will embark on a remarkable journey into the heart of West Africa, to the Dogon people, whose ancient wisdom challenges our understanding of human history and makes us wonder if we were once not alone in the universe. This is a story of stars, myths, and mysterious knowledge that seemingly should not have existed in the minds of people who lived long before telescopes were invented. Let's begin our journey with a man named Robert Temple. Imagine a scholar of the 70s of the 20th century, bent over ancient texts and ethnographic records. In his hands are pages filled with descriptions of the beliefs of the Dogon people of Africa, and with each line he reads, his amazement only grows. What he discovers in these records is so incredible that at first he cannot believe his eyes. The Dogon are a people living in an area called Bandiagara in Mali, in the heart of West Africa. Their houses, built of clay and stone, cling to rocky ledges like swallows' nests. Here, among the red rocks and baobabs, under the scorching African sun, the amazing knowledge of the stars has been passed down from generation to generation for centuries. Robert Temple, studying the writings of French ethnographers Marcel Griol and Germain Dieterlen, who lived for many years among the Dogon people and recorded their myths, discovered something remarkable. The Dogon knew of the existence of a star that cannot be seen with the naked eye. This star is a companion to bright Sirius, the most visible star in our night sky. They called it Po Tolo, which means seed of Po, a tiny but incredibly important seed. But this was only the beginning of amazing discoveries. The Dogon knew not only of the existence of this invisible star, but also of its properties, which European science did not discover until the 19th and 20th centuries. They said that Po Tolo was the smallest and heaviest of all stars, that it was made of a special metal called sagal, which was not found on Earth, and that it revolved round Sirius in 50 years. Imagine Temple's amazement when he compared this ancient knowledge with the findings of modern astronomy. Sirius B, that's what astronomers call Sirius's companion, is indeed a white dwarf, a star of incredible density. A teaspoon of its matter would weigh several tons, and indeed, its orbital period around Sirius is about 50 years. But how could the ancient Africans have known this? Temple delved deeper and deeper into the labyrinth of Dogon myths and discovered more and more striking correspondences. The Dogon knew that the orbit of Po-Tolo was elliptical, with Sirius at one of the focal points of this ellipse, a knowledge that mankind had only acquired thanks to Kepler in the 17th century. They depicted this orbit in their ritual drawings, showing the correct relationship between the stars. But even that was not enough. The Dogon spoke of a third star in the Sirius system, a star they called Eme Yatolo, the Star of Women. In the year 1976, when Temple published the first edition of his book, The Mystery of Sirius, the existence of this third star had not yet been confirmed by science. Astronomers suspected its presence, but could not observe it. It was not until the year 1992 that the existence of Sirius was finally confirmed. How is this possible? How could an African people who had no telescopes or other astronomical instruments know about invisible stars and their orbits? Temple proposed a hypothesis that seemed insane to many of his contemporaries. This knowledge was passed on to the Dogon people by intelligent beings from the Sirius system who visited Earth about 5,000 years ago. According to Dogon myths, these creatures are called Namo. Imagine these mysterious visitors as Dogon lore describes them. Tall, graceful creatures, more fish-like than human. They breathe in water and wear transparent helmets filled with liquid. The Dogon call them masters of the water and mentors, saying that it was the Namo who taught their ancestors everything they know about the stars, farming, and crafts. The myths tell how the Namo arrived on Earth in a large ark that descended from the sky with a deafening rumble similar to the roar of modern jet engines. Upon landing, the ark left a trail that the Dogon compare to a copper sandal and slipped in the mud, forming Lake Debo. The Dogon distinguish between the ark itself, the landing vehicle, and a large interstellar craft that remained in orbit and looked like a new star from Earth. The purpose of Namo's visit, according to Dogon legends, was to repopulate the Earth with intelligent life. They passed on their life principles to humans, shared their knowledge, and even shared their flesh to nourish the first humans. But the most intriguing thing about these myths is that the Namo, according to the Dogon, are supposed to return. Perhaps they are waiting for Earth's civilization to reach a level of development at which new contact would be safe for both sides. Temple began to look for traces of such knowledge in other ancient cultures and discovered surprising parallels. In ancient Egypt, Sirius was central to religion and the calendar. The Egyptians called it Sotha and associated it with the goddess Isis. 70 days, during which Sirius remains invisible in the sky, the Egyptians set aside for embalming the dead. Is this a coincidence? Even more striking were the connections between Egyptian myths and the Dogon knowledge of the dual nature of Sirius. Isis and her sister Nephthys in Egyptian mythology could symbolize the visible Sirius A and invisible Sirius B. The Egyptians, like the Dogon, believed that the souls of the dead went to the Sirius system. Temple also drew attention to the Great Sphinx. He surmised that it was not originally a statue of a lion with a human head, but a depiction of a dog, the sacred animal of the god Anubis, the guide of souls to the afterlife. Traces of water erosion on the Sphinx indicate its antiquity and that it was once surrounded by water, perhaps a protective moat, which would be logical for amphibians like Nomo. The Great Pyramids of Giza, too, in Temple's opinion, could have been built not only by humans. In their proportions are encoded mathematical constants and parameters of the Sirius system, including the relative masses of the 3 stars. The pyramids were erected in the so-called Age of Contact, the period between 5 and 3,000 years ago, when, according to Temple's hypothesis, the Earth experienced an active interaction with the civilization of Sirius. But the Egyptian parallels are just the tip of the iceberg. Temple found traces of knowledge of the Sirius system in the mythologies of many different peoples. In ancient Mesopotamia, there were legends about Oana, an intelligent, amphibious creature that came out of the sea and taught people the arts and sciences. Oand was depicted with a fishtail, which is remarkably similar to the descriptions of Nomo, the Sumerian god Enki, who lived in the subterranean waters of Abzu, could also be an echo of the memory of mankind's aquatic mentors. The Anunnaki, the 50 great gods of Sumerian mythology, bore the number 50, which Temple associates with the 50-year period of Sirius B's revolution. Even in distant Greece, Temple found echoes of the Sirius tradition. The myth of the Argonauts tells of the ship Argo with 50 heroes, again, the sacred number 50. Cerberus, the guardian of the underworld, was originally depicted with 50 heads, making him the Greek analog of the Egyptian Anubis. Temples's findings in the area of ancient Greek oracular centers are particularly interesting. The location of sites such as Delphi, Dodona, Siva, and Thebes form a complex geodetic network, the so-called geodetic octaves. This indicates that the ancients possessed advanced geographical and geodetic knowledge, which, according to modern ideas, should not have been available to them. The Pythagorean tradition, rooted in Egyptian and Babylonian knowledge, preserved secret astronomical information. The Pythagorean interval, equal to approximately 1 13/13, is strangely related to the fine structure constant in physics and encoded in the dimensions of the Egyptian pyramids. The Neoplatonist Proclus in the 5th century AD demonstrated a profound cosmological knowledge by asserting the existence of invisible celestial bodies and their orbits. He believed that the gods had transmitted astronomical knowledge to the ancient peoples of the Near East, an amazing foreshadowing of modern ideas about paleocontact. Even in China, Temple found intriguing parallels. Fuxi and Nuiwa, the mythical founders of Chinese civilization, were depicted with intertwined tails and holding surveyor's tools, a carpenter's angle and compass. Chinese dragons may have been an evolution of the amphibious images of the founders of civilization, but the Dogon knowledge of Sirius is only part of their amazing cosmology. They knew that the Earth revolves on its axis and circles the Sun in 365 days. They knew that the Moon describes a conical spiral and that the Sun revolves on its axis. The Dogon knew about Jupiter's 4 largest moons and Saturn's rings, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Moreover, they knew about 226 other star systems and the spiral shape of the Milky Way. According to Temple, the Dogon demonstrated knowledge of molecular biology, nuclear physics, and human physiology, including an understanding of the functions of red and white blood cells. But even the most amazing discoveries rarely go unanswered by skeptics. And the story of the Dogon was no exception. When in 1976th year, Robert Temple published his Mystery of Sirius, the scientific community met his hypothesis with a fair amount of distrust. Imagine the atmosphere of those years. The Cold War is in full swing, the space race between the superpowers. And suddenly, a researcher declares that the African people have known for thousands of years what European science has discovered only recently, and knows it thanks to contact with extraterrestrials. Talking about aliens in the 70s of the 20th century in a serious scientific environment was bad form. Temple's friends began to shun him, and some colleagues outright avoided meeting him. But worse, Temple faced what might be called active opposition. He claims that some secret services, especially the American secret services, were inexplicably hostile to his work. He was denied membership of professional associations, denied us and earnings, as if someone very much did not want his ideas to be widely disseminated. Temple even speculated that the CIA may have been influenced by Soviet agents seeking to maintain a monopoly in the field of anomaly research. Sounds almost like the plot of a spy novel, doesn't it? But in those years, when every unusual idea could be perceived as part of a larger geopolitical game, such suspicions did not seem so unbelievable. Nevertheless, Temple's book found an audience. Alternative cultural movements, especially the New Age movement, enthusiastically embraced his ideas. In the 70s and 80s, when people were actively seeking alternatives to traditional scientific and religious views, the story of the ancient astronauts fell on fertile ground. And with the advent of the internet, the book got a second life, becoming the subject of endless discussions on forums and blogs. But in parallel, with the growing popularity of Temple's ideas, their scientific criticism developed. One of the first serious opponents was the famous astronomer and popularizer of science, Carl Sagan. In his writings, Sagan did not deny that the Dogon could indeed have possessed unusual astronomical knowledge. He agreed that this knowledge was unlikely to have arisen on their own and must have come from a more advanced civilization. But what kind of civilization? Sagan assumed that this civilization was terrestrial. In his view, seemingly interesting cases have perfectly reasonable alternative explanations, or they are misreported, or they are simply evasions, hoaxes, and misrepresentations. In other words, Sagan believed that either the Dogon had gained their knowledge from European travelers and missionaries, or their knowledge had been exaggerated or misinterpreted by explorers. This criticism was strongly supported by the work of the Belgian anthropologist Walter van Beek, who conducted his own field research among the Dogon people. The results of his work were very disappointing for supporters of the paleo-contact theory. Van Beek stated that he found no evidence of Dogon knowledge of the dual nature of Sirius, its density, or the 50-year period of circulation of the invisible satellite. Moreover, the Dogon, who were not in the circle of the French ethnographer Marcel Griaule, had never heard of Sigi Tolo or Po Tolo, the mythical names of the stars in the Sirius system. This discovery cast doubt on the validity of all the information obtained by Griaule and his colleague Germain de Terlin. It has been suggested that these researchers may have unintentionally distorted the information in the process of recording and interpreting it. Imagine the situation. A European ethnographer, sincere in his desire to understand and preserve African culture, talks to the locals through an interpreter. Visible stars are mentioned, but a researcher already familiar with modern astronomical discoveries might misinterpret these references as evidence of knowledge about invisible celestial bodies. Griaule's aim was to liberate African thought, the noble task of showing the richness and depth of African traditions to the European world. But in pursuit of this goal, he may have unwittingly attributed to the Dogon knowledge they did not possess, or presented their cosmology in a more systematized form than it actually existed. Critics have also put forward the so-called missionary version. According to this hypothesis, the Dogon could have received astronomical knowledge from Christian missionaries in the 20s of the 20th century, just at the time when Sirius B was much written about in popular literature. The discovery of this star in the 19th century and its unusual properties really attracted the attention of both scientists and the general public. However, this version is also not without weaknesses. Critics of the missionary hypothesis rightly point out that if they had received knowledge from the Europeans, the Dogon would have reported 9 satellites of Jupiter, not 4, because by that time, more moons of this planet were already known. In addition, the spiral shape of our galaxy was discovered only in the middle of the 20th century, much later than the supposed time of contact with the missionaries. But the most painful discoveries awaited researchers of the Dogon culture in the field of cultural anthropology. The Russian scientist P.A. Kutsenkov showed in his works that the image of the Dogon created in ethnographic literature, especially by the Griot school, not only distorted ideas about their real culture, but even led to deformation of its perception by the Dogon themselves. Imagine this strange situation. A people living their traditional life suddenly finds that the whole world knows about them, thanks to some astronomical mystery that most of them have never heard of. Today's educated Dogon people often express irritation at the hype surrounding the astronomical mystery because it obscures their true mythology, their rich artistic traditions, their complex social structure, and the real problems they face in the modern world. The situation was exacerbated by the activities of various cultural missions, including UNESCO programs, which, according to critics, contributed to the artificial reproduction of lost practices to attract tourists. These practices were often based not on living tradition, but on published descriptions by researchers, creating a kind of feedback loop between scholarly texts and reality. This phenomenon is not unique to the Dogon. In anthropology, it is known as the observer effect, a situation where the very process of studying a culture changes it. But in the case of the Dogon, this effect was reinforced by the international fame and mystical halo that surrounded their culture, thanks to the theory of paleocontact. Erich von Däniken, another well-known proponent of the ancient astronaut idea, was also criticized for not being sufficiently rigorous in his approach to the facts. Critics accused him of falsifying some of the evidence, such as the publication of photographs of pottery with images of flying saucers, which had been made by a potter commissioned by him, especially for the book. Such revelations have cast a shadow over the entire field of paleocontact research, making many scientists even more cautious about any claims of extraterrestrial influence on the development of human civilizations. But Robert Temple did not give up. When in 1992nd year was finally confirmed the existence of Sirius C, the very third star of the system, which he wrote about in the 70s, based on the Dogon legends, he took it as a convincing confirmation of the correctness of his hypothesis. My predictions were strictly scientific and absolutely concrete, he asserted. And this discovery, in his opinion, made attempts to disprove his theory ridiculous. However, the scientific community took this confirmation with much less enthusiasm. Skeptics pointed out that the existence of a third component in the Sirius system was suspected by astronomers back in the 60s of the 20th century on the basis of the analysis of orbital disturbances. And Temple could draw this information from the scientific literature of that time, and then find the relevant elements in Dogon mythology. The controversy surrounding the Dogon enigma continues today. On the one hand, more and more evidence is accumulating that many claims of unusual Dogon knowledge may be the result of inaccurate interpretations or cultural distortions. On the other hand, some aspects of their traditional cosmology still remain mysterious and poorly explained within conventional theories of cultural diffusion. Perhaps the truth, as is often the case, lies somewhere in the middle. The Dogon do have a rich and complex mythological tradition in which the stars play an important role. But turning this tradition into evidence of paleocontact may be the result of superimposing modern scientific knowledge on ancient symbols and metaphors. And yet, there is something subtly mysterious about this story. As you sit under a starry sky and gaze up at bright Sirius, you can't help but wonder, what if the ancients really did know more than we realize? What if the depths of human memory hold echoes of events so ancient and unusual that we simply cannot interpret them correctly? But let us return to Robert Temple himself and his amazing discoveries in ancient texts and mythologies. After all, the history of the Dogon is just one thread in a huge tapestry that he began to weave, studying traces of possible paleocontact in cultures around the world. And the deeper he delved into this labyrinth of ancient knowledge, the more striking coincidences he discovered. Imagine a quiet evening in a library as Temple leans over the yellowed pages of ancient Egyptian texts. In the flickering light of the table lamp, the hieroglyphics come alive before him, telling of gods who came from the stars. Sirius, Sothis to the Egyptians, was more than just a bright star in the sky. It was a sacred luminary with which the entire religious and calendar system of one of the greatest civilizations of antiquity was connected. 70 days a year, Sirius remains invisible in the Egyptian sky, the period when the star rises with the sun and is lost in its rays. And it was 70 days, according to tradition, that were allotted by the Egyptians for embalming the dead pharaohs. An accident? Temple didn't think so. He saw a deep connection between the invisibility cycle of Sirius and the Egyptians' ideas about the journey of the soul to the afterlife. But the most intriguing discovery awaited him when he studied the Great Sphinx. This silent guardian of the Giza Plateau, in Temple's opinion, holds a secret much older than is commonly believed. Having carefully studied the traces of erosion on the body of the Sphinx, he came to the conclusion that originally it was not a statue of a lion with a human head, but an image of a dog, a sacred animal of the god Anubis, the guide of souls to the realm of the dead. The human face of the Sphinx, Temple argued, was carved much later, when the original meaning of the monument had been forgotten. And the pattern of erosion suggests that for a long time the statue was surrounded by water, perhaps a protective moat. Why did the ancient builders need a water barrier around the stone statue? Temple surmised that it had to do with the amphibious nature of those to whom the monument was dedicated. The Great Pyramids of Giza also did not remain unnoticed by the researcher. In their proportions and sizes, he found coded mathematical constants connected with the Sirius system. The ratios of heights and bases of pyramids, according to his calculations, reflect relative masses of 3 stars of this system. It is as if ancient architects left in stone a message about distant suns invisible to the human eye. The time of construction of pyramids, about 4,500 years ago, falls in that very age of contact, which Temple defined as the period between 5 and 3 millennia BC. It was then, according to his hypothesis, that the Earth experienced an active interaction with a civilization from the Sirius system. But the pyramids and the Sphinx are not the only mysteries of ancient Egypt. Temple drew attention to the famous maps of Piri Reis, a 16th century Turkish admiral who claimed to have based his cartographic work on ancient sources. These maps depicted with remarkable accuracy the outline of Antarctica, a continent that was not officially discovered until the 19th century, and depicted without the ice cover that it had been millions of years earlier. How could ancient cartographers have known about the existence and shape of a continent hidden under many kilometers of ice? Temple saw this as further evidence that ancient civilizations possessed knowledge whose source goes beyond conventional ideas of human history. The Egyptian and Mesopotamian civilizations, Temple observed, emerged almost simultaneously, as if from nothing. Yesterday, by historical standards, people were living in primitive settlements, hunting and gathering. And tomorrow, they were building cities, inventing writing, creating complex religious systems, and demonstrating profound astronomical knowledge. Such a leap in development, the researcher believed, indicates an external influence or common origin of these cultures. In ancient Greece, the traces of the Sirius tradition were even more veiled, but no less intriguing. The myth of the Argonauts, for example, tells of the ship Argo with 50 heroes, the same sacred number that is associated with the period of Sirius B's revolution. Isis in Greek tradition was associated with this very ship, creating a direct link between the Egyptian goddess of Sirius and the Greek myth of the voyage for the Golden Fleece. Circe, the enchantress from the Odyssey, bore a name meaning falcon, the sacred bird of the Egyptian god Horus, symbol of resurrection and rebirth. And Hecate, the goddess of magic and crossroads, whose name means 100, was identified with Sotis, the Greek name for Sirius. The 100 could symbolize the doubled 50-year cycle of the invisible satellite's circulation. Templa was particularly struck by discoveries related to the location of ancient Greek oracular centers. Such sacred places as Delphi, Dodona, Siwa in Egypt, and Thebes form a complex geometric network on the map, the so-called geodesic octaves. The distances between them are correlated as musical intervals, creating a kind of geographical music of the ancient world. This discovery indicates that the builders of the oracle centers had precise geodetic knowledge and understood the size and shape of the Earth. It is as if they were creating a planetary communication system based on geometric principles that we are only beginning to understand today. These centers were associated with the so-called omphalos, sacred stones that symbolized the navel of the world. Temple suggested that the location of the omphalos could be related to the unspoken name of God in Jewish tradition, Yehovah, which consists of 7 vowel sounds, each of which corresponded to a particular oracular center. The Pythagorean tradition, deeply rooted in Egyptian and Babylonian knowledge, has preserved surprising mathematical constants. The Pythagorean interval, equal to approximately 1 whole and 13 thousandths, is strangely related to the fine structure constant in modern physics, the fundamental constant that defines the interaction of the electromagnetic field with matter. This Pythagoras particle, equal to approximately 0 and 13 hundredths, is not only encoded in the dimensions of the Egyptian pyramids, but also reflects the degree of freedom of the electron in the atom. How could the ancient Greeks know about quantum properties of matter 2,500 years before their discovery by modern science? The Neoplatonist Proclus, who lived in the 5th century AD, demonstrated a truly remarkable cosmological knowledge. He argued for the existence of invisible celestial bodies, satellites of planets, and invisible orbits, i.e., the orbits of these bodies. 1,000 and 1,500 years before the invention of the telescope, Proclus spoke of things that astronomers were only able to confirm in modern times. Proclus also believed that the gods had passed on astronomical knowledge to the ancient peoples of the Near East, an amazing foreshadowing of modern theories of paleocontact. His work may have influenced the great Kepler, who discovered the laws of planetary motion. It is possible that Kepler drew inspiration not only from observations, but also from ancient texts that preserve echoes of forgotten wisdom. Even in faraway China, Temple found intriguing parallels. Fuxi and Nuiwa, the mythical founders of Chinese civilization, were depicted with intertwined snake tails, a clear sign of their amphibious nature. In their hands, they held a carpenter's angle and compass, the tools of surveyors, indicating their association with precise measurement and cartography. China had grand geodetic programs on a scale greater than the Mediterranean octaves. For example, the measurements of the Chinese astronomer Yixing in the 8th century AD to determine the size of the Earth were carried out with astonishing accuracy. The Chinese dragons, so important in local mythology, may have been an evolution of images of the very amphibious founders of civilization. All these discoveries led Temple to think deeply about the nature of intelligent life in the universe. He argued that intelligence need not necessarily evolve only on land. Oceans cover most of the surface of planets, and amphibious life forms may be even more common than terrestrial life forms. The Namo of the Dogon, the Oannes of the Mesopotamians, and the water gods of various cultures probably all retain the memory of actual contact with intelligent inhabitants of water worlds. But Temple went even further in his thinking. He believed that contact with extraterrestrial civilizations was not only possible, but inevitable. But for this to happen, humanity must abandon narrow religious prejudices and narrow national views in favor of a truly cosmic perspective. We must be prepared for such contact psychologically and spiritually. Perhaps, the researcher speculated, alien civilizations are waiting for Earth's humanity to reach a certain level of maturity at which contact would be safe for both sides. Maybe our space achievements, launching satellites, flying to the moon, sending automatic stations to distant planets, are signals that we are ready for greater interaction. Temple even wondered if his own book was not a kind of signal that could trigger a mechanism to restore ancient contact. After all, if somewhere in the Sirius system there really are intelligent beings observing the development of Earth's civilization, then the publication of a work about their previous visits could be a sign that humanity is ready for a new stage of interaction. And so we come to the heart of this amazing story. the question of what it all means to us, living in the 21st century, under the same starry skies that the ancient Egyptians, Dogonians, and Greek philosophers contemplated thousands of years ago. Imagine for a moment. You walk out of your house on a quiet evening, raise your eyes to the sky, and see the bright dot of Sirius. And suddenly, you realize that you may be looking not just at a distant star, but at the home of a civilization that once touched our world. Temple believed that his work was not just an academic study, but a message to the future. He speculated that the launching of spacecraft such as Voyager, which had traveled interstellar in the 70s, might have been a wake-up call to ancient observers. Perhaps somewhere in the Sirius system, intelligent beings are watching our first timid steps into space and waiting for the right moment to renew contact. But what does the right time mean? Temple believed that it was not only a matter of technological development, but also of the spiritual maturity of humanity. We must learn to see ourselves not as the only intelligent beings in the universe, but as part of a much broader cosmic community. This requires abandoning narrow, nationalistic, and religious prejudices in favor of a truly planetary and then cosmic mindset. Interestingly, the Dogon themselves are in a very difficult situation today because of the worldwide fame that Temple's theory has brought them. Modern, educated representatives of this people often express dissatisfaction with the way their culture has been presented to the world. The hype around the astronomical mystery obscures the richness of their true traditions. The art of wood carving, complex ritual dances, a deep philosophy of the relationship between man and nature, and social structures that have developed over centuries. A paradoxical situation arose. The attempt to exalt the Dogon's ancient wisdom led to a distortion of their living culture. Tourist agencies began to organize trips to the people who know the secrets of Sirius, and locals sometimes reproduced ancient rituals based not on their own traditions, but on descriptions in books by European explorers. In this way, the science of culture began to influence culture itself, creating a strange feedback loop between text and reality. UNESCO's cultural heritage programs, for all their good intentions, sometimes contributed to this process by supporting the reproduction of lost practices that were reconstructed from published ethnographic descriptions. It appeared that the Dogon were learning their own culture from books written by European scholars. This situation begs the question of how complex the relationship between science and culture is, between the attempt to understand the past and the impact of that understanding on the present. Perhaps the Dogon enigma is not only a question about where they got their astronomical knowledge from, but also a lesson in how our perceptions of antiquity shape modernity. But let's leave aside these complex questions of cultural anthropology and return to the main point. What if Temple was right? What if somewhere 8.5 light years away, in the system of the brightest star in our sky, there really is a civilization that once visited Earth? What if the ancient myths of gods who came from the heavens were not figments of the human imagination, but time-warped memories of real events? Temple emphasized that humanity should not see itself as an object of cosmic charity. We have our own value and uniqueness. Our planet, with its incredible biodiversity, our capacity for creativity, our music, poetry, our attempts to understand the universe. All this makes us interesting partners for cosmic dialogue, not just wards of more advanced civilizations. Perhaps it is our flaws and contradictions, our struggle between good and evil, our capacity for both great love and destructive hatred that make us unique in the universe. We are a young civilization that is just learning to understand its place in the cosmos, and that has its own beauty and value. Sirius continues to shine in our skies as it did thousands of years ago over Dogon villages, Egyptian pyramids, and Greek temples. Modern astronomers are studying this star system with powerful telescopes and discovering more and more details about its structure. We now know that Sirius A is a young, hot star, almost twice as massive as our Sun. Sirius B is really a white dwarf, the remnant of a star that was once a giant, but has now shrunk to the size of the Earth while retaining a mass comparable to that of the Sun. Sirius C, whose existence was confirmed in the 90s of the 20th century, remains the least studied component of the system. It is a red dwarf, much smaller and colder than its two bright neighbors. Could there be planets in such a complex star system? Modern astronomy does not rule out the possibility, although the conditions there would be quite exotic. The search for extraterrestrial life is now being conducted with the most modern instruments. The Kepler Space Telescope has discovered thousands of exoplanets, some of which are within the habitable zone of their stars. SETI projects are listening to the cosmos for artificial signals. And who knows, maybe one day we'll hear a message from the Sirius system. In the meantime, we can only ponder these possibilities under the starry sky. And there is something beautiful and important in these reflections, regardless of whether Temple's hypothesis is right or wrong. After all, the very ability of human beings to look up at the stars and question their place in the universe is already a miracle. The ability to create myths that attempt to explain our origins and purpose, the ability to dream of meeting other intelligent beings, all of this makes us unique as far as we know, in the entire cosmos. The Dogon in their myths say that the Namo will return. But perhaps the most important thing is not whether they will actually return, but that we continue to look to the sky with hope and curiosity. That we haven't lost the ability to wonder and dream. That somewhere in our hearts we know that we are not alone in the universe, even if we have not yet met our cosmic neighbors. The story of the Dogon and Sirius is, above all, a story about the human search for meaning, about trying to understand where we come from and where we are going, the desire to find our place in the infinite cosmos, and whether or not we were once visited by intelligent amphibians from a double star system. This search is what makes us who we are. The next time you see Sirius in the night sky, and you can see it almost any time of year, especially on clear winter evenings, think of this amazing story. Think about the fact that perhaps at this very moment, someone out there, 8.5 light years away, is also looking up at our yellow sun and pondering the possibility of intelligent life on a third planet from that star. Or maybe they already know about us. Maybe they are waiting for us to become wise enough for real contact. Maybe every step we take towards cognition of the universe, every manifestation of kindness and love, every attempt to understand each other, brings this moment closer. Good night, my dear listeners. May your dreams be full of stars and amazing possibilities. May tomorrow bring new discoveries and new reasons to admire this beautiful and mysterious world we are lucky enough to live in. And remember, every time you raise your eyes to the night sky, you are participating in the oldest and most important human endeavor, the search for answers to the eternal questions about our place in the universe. See you next time, when we will again take a journey through the wonderful mysteries of our world. Take care, and don't forget to look at the stars from time to time.